You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is Academy Award winning producer and author, Steve Starkey. And we're going to talk about his brand new book called Stupid Is as Stupid Does. For those who are watching on YouTube, here it is for you. And it is about the whole process of producing this film, Forrest Gump. It's pretty amazing, actually. So I can't wait to get into it. Everybody always asks, what does a producer do? That's always a question I get and other people get. And after reading this book, we realize they do everything, absolutely everything.
Which is, I think, why it attracted me, into that role is, at the time I was pretty isolated in the editing room. And my mentor at the time, Frank Marshall, was overseeing directing this documentary I was editing. And he would describe his experiences on the movie set, and it seemed all encompassing. And I thought, wow, that would really be fun. You get to have your fingers in all the different aspects of filmmaking from beginning to end. And when you're sitting isolated in an editing room, you really start fantasizing about this, crazy life you could be living like what Frank was doing.
And your life became very crazy afterwards because it's really fascinating. It's a fascinating book for anyone. I mean, this movie is beloved. It's one of my top five favorite movies, and as I got to see it again on the big screen this past summer. The wonderful Granada Theater here in Santa Barbara had four Saturday nights of the Robert Zemeckis films, and the last one that they showed was Forrest Gump, and you were there doing a Q&A prior to the film, and you had so many fascinating stories about it. But as I said to you, I hadn't seen it in a number of years. Here it is, it's the 30th anniversary when it came out, and it touched me even more. And I think as we get older or different periods of our lives, movies have different effects on us at different times. And this one really did affect me on a deeper level, even more than the first time. And I've always loved this movie. Have you had that reaction to people? Because you're out there showing it now again on a book tour.
Yeah, it's just when you see movies on the big screen, they affect you, much more personally, I think, than when you're just sitting at home watching, streaming a film. And so it's kind of refreshing to go out and let the movie envelop you in the way that it only happens in a movie theater, particularly if you have, like in the screening that you went to, you had a pretty good size audience. And the audience, you can kind of feel everybody is sort of feeling the same thing with you when you're sad or when you're laughing, and it's contagious. And so, yeah, people have said to me, they've had a delight in seeing the movie again on the big screen. So, wow, I didn't realize it was such an epic size, movie, and that it was so emotional, and that Tom Hanks was so wonderful. All these reactions that I don't think you'd have if you just saw, oh, there it is again on, whatever whatever station you're watching.
Right, exactly. I mean, as I said, I owned the movie. At that time it was a VHS, but anyhow, and periodically you'd watch it, but there was a complete different experience. And I talk about this all the time about seeing movies in the movie theater. But when it's a movie that's been out for 30 years, it's harder to do that. So it's nice to bring them back and to see all of the movies that they showed at the Granada, Back to the Future. I mean, Roger Rabbit, you also spoke at that movie too. So it was fun. It was a fun experience. I asked them, "Are you going to do this again next year?" It was so much fun to see all these different films again on the big screen. So tell me how did you get into producing, and how did you get into producing this particular film?
Well, it's a long road, really, and I described it in the first book that I wrote called Breaking and Entering. But I didn't know anything about how movies were made. I just kind of fell in love with them when I was at school at Berkeley, not in film school, just at school. They screened movies at the Pacific Film Archive in the Art Museum, and they invited directors to come and speak about their films. And when you're hearing stories about the making of the film and also hearing their insights into their film, it sort of broadens your perspective and heightens your emotion, that how do I get to do that when I graduate from college kind of thing. So, I just went down to LA and broke into the business as a lighting technician, but eventually became worked at Lucasfilm in the editing room on the two Star Wars sequels, and then found my way down to Amblin, Spielberg's company, when I was editing one of the documentaries. And then through that, I got a job as an associate producer overseeing post-production and visual effects, which led me into Roger Rabbit, the first film with Bob Zemeckis. And that movie was a year and a half in post-production. So during the course of that time, Bob and I really were joined at the hip. And it was sort of a relationship was formed, although when he did the sequels to Back to the Future, he had producers on the film, and I came onto that film, those two films, in the similar role as Roger Rabbit. And then when Bob took a hiatus and came back to make Death Becomes Her, he invited me to produce the film with him, and then I worked with him ever since. Though that's the short story. That was 15 years I just told in about 3 minutes.
Well, let's talk about this movie, Forrest Gump, and this book because, gosh, it's kind of like you're kind of rooting for the film, because you're going, we know what happened, but, there was a lot of intrigue because you had a lot of issues with the studio. So that's really what I want to get into because you really were under the gun with this film.
Yeah, it's not a conventional film by any means.
No.
It's just a story of a simple man who just finds himself in extraordinary circumstances. And the only thing guiding him really is his heart, his love for his mama, and he listened carefully to everything she told him, and he abided by those rules. And then, of course, he's also guided by the love of his life, Jenny. And so a very endearing character, but at the same time, as a movie, when you look at the script, the studio is like, gosh, despite the fact we have Bob Zemeckis, at the helm, we have Tom Hanks, in the film, it's a risky venture because it's a giant film. I mean, not it's giant in scope by any standards, but also some very experimental, or I should say, untried special effects, particularly the interactions with the historical characters. So there was a lot of reason for them to fear the film and its potential, at the box office, which is what they're always looking for. So from the very beginning, it was a tenuous relationship, one where they were very trepidatious, and you know, so they wanted it done as inexpensively, unrealistically inexpensively as possible. And Bob and I kind of stuck to our guns, and so when the cost started rising in the making of the film, uh, you know, there were some battles to be won with the studio. But it all worked out, of course. But along the way, it wasn't easy.
Well, let's talk a little bit what how you were trying to pull the wool over
Well,
their
yeah,
eyes. A little bit about that budget and how many days you were going over as far as the shoot itself.
I discovered even up to that point in my career, although I was quite green going into the movie, because it's only the second picture that I produced, that the only way really they came in the 11th hour and said, you have to reduce this budget by 20%, and it was like, well, how do you want me to do that? And it's like, well, that's up to you guys. You're the filmmakers. You figure it out. Well, we were already, the cast was already cast. All the principal people that were working on the film, from the director of photography to the designer, everybody was already hired. So the rates are set. The scope of the film, the only way that you could bring the budget down is to start cutting scenes out. And the filmmakers didn't want to cut anything. And they were just start cutting. So we don't care what you do, just get this number down. So we did start trimming a little bit, but that really didn't add up to enough. And so at a certain point, I said, schedule, what if we say it only take 5? And I say that for every week. Well, now you're talking about cutting like 10 days out of the shooting schedule unrealistically. But I said, what's the worst that can happen? Me, a naive producer, what do I have to lose? So we did that not only with the shooting schedule, which then starts reflecting big budget savings, we did that with departments as well. It's like, oh, what if we go into the football stadium and say, well, instead of 1,000 extras, we really only need 500. Well, I'll cut that out of the budget. But then when the day came to do it, I put them back into the stadium. So there was this ticking time bomb where all these elements that I had reduced in order to get the budget done properly, or I knew that it was going to explode, and it did. We got back to the studio, and they weren't happy, and they really started watching the movie like hawks. But so, but those are the kinds of things that you do when you're passionate about the movie. You just kind of go, whatever it takes, we're going to lay it down and go. So that's what we did.
And it shows the belief in the film because and all of you and keeping the integrity of the script and of this movie and believing in it and knowing that I think you all felt you had something special, I'm sure, as you were making this.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and the screenplay was as emotional as the movie. I mean, the screenplay was a good script and it really worked. And Eric Roth is a brilliant writer. But yeah, you don't know like that you have something as big as the movie became because you're just working too hard. All you're doing is trying to make every scene every day the best it can be, not knowing because you're shooting completely out of order, out of continuity. You don't know like this piece and how's that going to fit into that, and is this going to work, and is that voiceover appropriate for there, and is Forrest, is the story moving properly? Is the timing, everything, all the elements that add up to make the final film are not in front of you, but you do have this overriding feeling at the beginning that you know that this is a movie we really want to, we want to hold on to and do it in the way that we see it. And so that's all you can do, and that's what we did.
So when you also you were doing a lot of other work on it. You were working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, I think, pretty much in this film, trying to get things done, ahead of schedule. I mean, how many days did you go over the schedule?
Oh, it was probably close to 10 days,
Yeah.
but it was only a day over the original schedule.
Okay.
So in other words, they were days that it was just like, how do I leak in these days over, as we were going, because we were heading back to where we started because we didn't take anything out. And look, these were professionals who came up with the skit. You'd go and you talk to the cinematographer, you talk to the designer, you talk to all the people who would contribute to the pace of the shooting and to Zemeckis himself. And how fast do you think you can shoot this much of the film? And it was very realistic at the beginning. When we cut it down, it was terribly unrealistic. So the logic is it was going to go back to what everybody predicted in the first place. And it did. Now, that was trouble.
Yes.
But, we were going along like we were doing great. We were sticking to the schedule.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Meantime, back at the ranch at the
Yeah, back at the
Paramount,
ranch,
they weren't
they
too
weren't so
happy.
happy.
When you were going through this. So, one of the things that you had to work on this budget and cut this budget quite a bit, that Tom and Bob Zemeckis both decided not to get paid
Yeah,
up
what
front.
they reduced, their salaries in knowing that, or with the understanding that they would make up their salary in the success of the film. And that's what finally put the budget over the finish line. So they actually had some of their own salary at stake while we were making the film. But that's how shows how much passion they had for the film. I
Yes.
mean, that they were willing to give up part of, their earnings on behalf of the film. And so it paid off in the end. So good for them.
Yeah. Did they get a percentage
Yeah, they
at the
got they
back
got some
end?
I don't can't tell you the deal. I don't know them, but yes, they did. And so it compensated them for their loss.
Going into it. Let's talk a little bit about the running, that the running scenes of Tom Hanks running around, running through America. Let's talk about how that was filmed and because that had to be huge on the budget. And you wanted to be in Valley, and they did not want you to film there. So let's talk about that.
Well, the run, it started out quite simply because he takes off on his run in the South from his home. And so that was pretty easily, we could just dress him, he's dressed as he was, through the rest of the movie at that point, and he takes off from the house and runs down the road and heads out of town. But then things got complicated because he crisscrosses the country. And during the course of this running a few times back and forth across the country, he changes his wardrobe, he changes his look, his hair's growing, his beard's growing, he's picking up followers along the way. And we weren't shooting any of that in continuity either. So it wasn't like, oh, let's just shoot his run in order so he'll slowly grow his hair and his beard and people will slowly gather behind him and it'll all be perfect. Well, it was like all of a sudden, oh, we're shooting the sequence where he's running through the mountains in the Rocky Mountains and we're going to be shooting it next week. What does he look like? So we had to have a all hands on deck meeting where we broke down every single place that was specified in the screenplay so we knew what Forrest would look like at any time when we were filming. And we would go like chasing fall colors in Vermont, or we'd go to Maine to shoot when he turns around at the lighthouse on the East Coast. So anyway, by the time we got back to Los Angeles and the ticking time bomb blew up, and my budget was revealed that it was really in trouble. The one big sequence we hadn't done was his where he ends the run in Monument Valley, and they said there is no way you're going to Monument Valley. And I said, I came to Bob, and he said, well, we're going to Monument Valley. You could figure this out. So I came up with a plan where if they wanted me to go to Canyon Country, which is north of Los Angeles, where like the Lone Ranger was shot, the TV serial. And so anyway, I came up with a budget. I said, look, if I can do it for exactly the same amount of money, that going out and spending time on location outside of Los Angeles and fly out to Monument Valley, can I go? And they said, yeah, but the problem is what if what if it rains? What if they had all these problems that could come up? And they said, we're going to have to get some insurance, and Bob and Tom are going to have to pay for it. So they did. They said, no, we're ending the movie in Monument Valley, ending the run in Monument Valley. And they put up the bond for the insurance, and off we went. And the funny thing is when I came back, we actually finished the work early and got back a few hours earlier than planned. And I went to the production guy at the studio and said, hey, we came in under budget. And he said, I love your logic. You're so far over budget on this movie, and you came in a few pennies under budget on the run. And I said, well, it's better than going over budget on the So
you
anyway,
were you were the optimist, ever
yes,
the optimist
ever the optimist, which I
on
think
this,
you have to be as a producer. You have to always be the optimist.
and the cheerleader and keeping everything going.
Yeah,
It's
we
really
can
quite
do this.
we can do it. So let's talk about when so you have a screening that you're showing, a private screening, I guess it was, that you didn't want to have it when you show it. Well, you explain when you have these screenings
Well,
and what happened.
there's a smaller theater in on the Paramount lot. I think now it's called the Sherry Lansing Theater, but
Oh,
at the time it was called the Paramount Theater. So that's where we screened the film for the first time for the studio executives, which was Sherry Lansing, John Goldwyn, Michelle Manning. They got to go in and see the finished film. And when they came out, I was there. Bob said, "Can you just attend and take their temperature when they come out?" So I'm there, and they come out, and I mean, they were teary-eyed. And Sherry said, you got to tell Bob that this is just a wonderful picture. And so, but we want to preview it. So I'm thinking, wait a second, you just said you love this movie. It's working great. They wanted to show it in front of an audience just to be sure. So they scheduled a preview in that theater just a week later or so. And so it was a smallish theater. And so we said, okay, we'll preview the movie, but we don't want to have preview cards. preview cards, they lead the witness. They force people who are in the theater to speak about things that maybe aren't even on their minds. And oftentimes you'll get information from people that mislead either the marketing or the picture itself based on what this audience says. So we didn't want to get it all messy because the movie was working great. But so I said, okay, we'll do the preview, but we don't want the cards. And Sherry said, fine. So we go to the screening and lights, are come down. I go, Tom Hanks attended, so I went and led him to his seat so no one saw him in the dark. And screening played great. I mean, everybody was quiet. No one left the theater. They were just glued to their seats. They were laughing. They were emotional. You can feel it. And so just before the movie ended, I went back and said, Tom, it's time to go unless you want to, to leave before the lights come up. And so he snuck out and I'm in the lobby and I see all these people from the preview group are standing in the line. I said, what are you guys doing here? We decided not to have preview cards. He said, well, Sherry Lansing ordered them. I said, she ordered them, what she said she didn't need them. And they went into the theater and started marching down the aisleway to hand out the cards and the pencils for the attendees of the screening. And so I marched in behind him and went up to the front of the theater and said, I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. You don't have to fill out the cards, pass them to the aisle. Sherry stands up in the back of the audience and says, no, no, don't listen to him. Take the cards, pass them out, and fill out the cards. And I'm like, and goes back and forth a few times. And this guy stands up in the middle of the audience and said, I don't know what you two are arguing about because this is the best movie I've ever seen. And that just quieted everything. So So I walked back to Sherry and I said, what's with the cards? And she said, look, I decided I want preview cards. And I said, okay, just thinking quickly. I tell you what if we take all the completed cards back to the editing room? We'll take a look at them and then we'll package them up and send them to the studio. And she said, fine. So that's how we settled things. And so we got back to the editing room, and sure enough, the people were just in love with the picture. And that's sort of, so there I was wondering. I remember sitting in my car with preview cards in the trunk going, I can't believe I stood up in the front of a movie theater screaming at the head of Paramount Pictures. But I guess, that's that's what I felt I needed to do. I don't know. Or I wasn't thinking. I don't know.
Again, sometimes when we're young and foolish, we do
Well,
these
just as a
things.
footnote to all of it, by the end of the process, meaning through the release and going to the Venice Film Festival, Sherry and I really kind of bonded to the point where she said, Steve, I got to tell you something. If I were the producer of this film, I would have fought just as hard as you did.
That's so great. It's
So
a
it was
great, great.
all a sweet, ending to what it was quite an acrimonious relationship during
Yes,
the
yes.
film.
Oh, it's
It
and then
was,
you win the Oscar, and then won all
yeah.
kinds of Oscars, and so
And
that
I
was
thanked and
true.
I thanked our benefactor
Yes.
who had allowed us to make the movie.
It's so great. Oh, Steve, I could talk to you further, but unfortunately our time is up. But everybody, please, you can buy this anywhere, right?
Yes,
Anywhere books.
on Amazon, I guess that's where people buy books, right?
Okay, stupid is as stupid does. It's really fascinating if you're a film aficionado and you want to know how a movie gets made, and a brilliant movie, this book is the book for you, and also for anybody who just loves this film. So thank you so much, Steve. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and I
Oh,
wish you much success with the book.
yeah, thank you. And it was nice of you to invite me, Jan. We'll do it again.
We'll definitely do it again for sure.
Okay,
Take care. Have a wonderful day.
thank you.